So we absolutely have to go ahead and touch on Tesla stock because it's currently sitting at a very critical area, and we recently just got some pretty bullish news, not just in regards to Tesla itself, but also in terms of the overall market structure. And so in this video, I want to go ahead and share some snippets from the Bloomberg terminal of the macroeconomic environment, kind of talk about some of the negatives, talk about some of the positives, but I want to start off with this positive bullish catalyst for Tesla in general that I think a lot of people are going to dismiss as a big nothing burger, but in reality it's something that's pretty powerful. And so make sure to watch this video in its entirety because there's a couple things we have to touch on. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is this post from Sawyer Merritt. He said Tesla has introduced a new feedback feature where you can now report FSD issues such as mapping issues, service related feedback, robotaxi, supercharging delivery, etc., and how Tesla will route the feedback to their respective teams and track for closure. You could also upload documents. This new feature for the first time creates a unified feedback system and should improve the overall ownership / customer experience. Now, the reason why this is something that I think a lot of people are going to sleep on, but it's a powerful move for Tesla, is because I have seen firsthand, I've witnessed how powerful having this feedback loop created is for the development of an AI project. Right now, not to delve too deep into like this history or the story, but a few years ago, I was part of a pilot team for this AI product. It was a new tool. It was a proprietary tool for a large financial institution. Now, let me tell you guys, I am not a tech guy, right? I'm a numbers guy, a finance guy. And so I don't say that I'm like the smartest in regards to tech, right? That I leave those conversations for my cousin who loves to talk about that, right? I personally couldn't tell you the difference between the meetings where we would sit with the developers and the engineers, right? And so not to say, hey, look, I'm dumb, I don't know what that is. That's not where my level of expertise is. I'm just a numbers guy. But what I can tell you is that having this feedback loop is super powerful because a couple of years ago when I was part of this pilot team and I was in charge of delivering the numbers from the feedback, like the information in this feedback loop in these Zoom meetings with the engineers and the developers. Again, I can't tell you what each of them do. I just know that they were doing the improvements. But what I did see as the numbers guy, right, as a finance guy, is the exponential acceleration in terms of the improvement from this proprietary AI product. Now, I know some of you guys will say, oh, Justin, who cares about your story? I could care less. No. Okay, look. Tesla now introducing this new kind of wheel in the feedback loop system can significantly improve FSD. And so that's pretty bullish. And I know people are going to say, Justin, it doesn't matter. FSD doesn't matter. Look, that's something that Tesla should have done a long time ago, but I'm glad that they're doing it now. And I think that in the next year, we've already heard Elon Musk, by the way, kind of allude that within the next few months, we're going to see the parameters for FSD 10x. But I think by including this, now I'm more optimistic. And I say this only because I witnessed it with my own eyes, how much better AI can be when you have kind of that human input. Because what ends up happening is that then the AI models, the developers, the engineers, whoever is in charge of it, right? The techies, the tech bros, the smart people, right? Maybe it's you watching this, can now expand on that and now train the systems to understand the flaws. And so that's very optimistic and bullish for Tesla. Now, I know people are going to kind of skip that. Now, going to kind of like my the area that I love to talk about, right? The macroeconomic environment. I want to go ahead and talk about what we recently talked about, which was last week's PPI report. Now, I know a lot of people are not familiar with PPI. They're more familiar with CPI, Consumer Price Index, right? The Producer Price Index was something that was a bit concerning that came out last week because this is the prices that producers pay. And oftentimes it's a precursor to what we're going to see for inflation for the consumer, because oftentimes when the producers are paying more, they're just going to kind of shove it over to the consumer. Now, it's not always the case, especially if there's not enough pricing power and the consumer is stretched thin. But what was pretty concerning was, okay, last week we had this reading that was the highest since the pandemic, right? And so that's a bit of a concern. And that's why when we look at the Bloomberg terminal, something I noticed was that the actual futures markets are now pricing in a smaller percent chance that we get a cut in September. So what we're seeing is now market participants are expecting an 84.5% chance that we get a 25 basis point cut in September. Now, let me go ahead and tell you guys, that's still pretty high, right? But prior to the PPI report, it was 99% that the future markets were certain that we were going to get that 25 basis point cut in September. So now we're seeing that certainty kind of fade. And so that means that next week, the next inflationary report, the PCE, that's going to be what we're going to want to watch out for coming out Friday, because that's an inflationary gauge that may shift how the Fed feels. So we want to pay attention to that. I just want to let you guys know that now the confidence is falling down. And of course, if we don't have that cut in September, that's going to be very bearish. And that's going to be very concerning, right? Because then eventually we may end up having a cut later on when it's too late, right? And that's kind of what President Donald Trump has been kind of making fun and mocking Jerome Powell, saying he's too late Powell, right? I think that's the nickname he's given him. So that's just something we want to be monitoring. I know when we talk about Tesla stock, I know a lot of people oftentimes will only focus on the charts, or maybe they'll only focus on the technology, right? The way I like to participate in the markets with, my capital, I like to synthesize multiple data points. I've said this so many times on the channel. I can't just rely on the charts. The squiggly lines, we know stocks don't adhere to whatever squiggly lines can show strength in the trend, and it is important. But I also want to know what's going on with the company. What's going on with the world, right? We just had the meeting with Putin and President Trump, and I think that was something that spooked the markets Friday, but we saw that the outcome of the meeting so far seemed positive, so we may end up having a positive week this week. But going on to some other information that we want to go ahead and touch on, this is the bullish perspective that I want to share in regards to the overall market, right? Because what we're looking at here is the S&P 500 index advance and decline. And what we're seeing is that market breadth, right? We talked about this within the Push and Profit Research Insider Group. We talk a lot about market internals. You want to look at volume, you want to look at leadership, and you want to look at market breadth. So what is market breadth? Well, when a large participation of the companies within the S&P 500 are pushing upwards, that gives more strength for individual stocks, let's say Tesla, to continue pushing up because the overall market is pushing up. And so what we see here is that 342 companies are positive, right? They're making these new highs. And 160 are low, right? That's not good. But it's much kind of tilted towards a strong market breadth where the market's pushing upwards. And that's why we're seeing the S&P 500, at these new highs. I mean, let's actually parse through. We'll kind of get away from Tesla for a second and look at SPY, right? SPY, it's been hitting new all-time highs, and I talked about this for those that are insiders within Push and Profit Research, right? We talked about how, we've had these alternating days where we fall down, we go up, down, up, down, up, down. I mean, it's literally, if I had my charts with the traditional colors of green and red, it would look like a Christmas tree, right? Although I take the colors off of my chart because I think one of the things I learned within the Chartered Market Technician program that I'm currently enrolled, just past level 1, is you want to take the colors out. It makes it like a gambling casino. You want to just keep it black and white. It makes it much easier to read price action. And so when you kind of take all that away, right, you see that the market's still pushing up. The structure is still there. It's higher lows. And so that's something that we want to be mindful of. The market is pretty strong and market breadth is also there. And so that's pretty bullish for Tesla because that means that it's not just, hey, the large companies pushing up, right? It'd be a concern if it was just Tesla pushing up or maybe Meta pushing up, but everyone else was falling down. No. What we're seeing is most of the companies are pushing up. And so that means that we could actually see the higher likelihood of Tesla following everyone else increase. Now, does that mean that Tesla can't fall down in silo? Absolutely not. We've seen that so many times where the market's taking off and Tesla isn't, right? We could see that. Just wanted to share that more times than not. When the overall market is pushing up, that's pretty good news, right? Now, I do want to also talk about this chart over here. I shared about this in my last video, but maybe you didn't see the last video, which, by the way, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. I talk a lot about Tesla stock, but also just how to, look at different stocks in general and what areas I'm looking at in terms of the market. And what we're looking at is the American Association of Individual Investors. And I talked about how there's this huge divergence where the S&P 500, again, is at these near all-time highs. But individual investors, retail investors, are pretty bearish. And so this divergence is actually pretty positive news, because oftentimes when the market is hitting new all-time highs and people are pretty bearish, that means there's more of an opportunity for these bearish individuals to flip and then actually become optimistic. And so there's more room for the market to go up. And I know that sounds confusing, right? Someone will say that doesn't make sense. If people are bearish and the market's up, that means the market's going to go down. No, it's kind of like this, I'm trying to think of the word, starts with a C, contrarian, that's the word, contrarian approach. What's bad is actually if the market was at all-time highs and everyone's bullish, right? That's when it's actually bad. There's a saying, I read it in a book. It was like an old book written, I think, in the 1950s. And it was, back when people used to shine their shoes, right? People don't shine their shoes like that anymore. But I think it was Jesse Livermore, one of these traders. And he said, look, when the market's at all-time highs and you hear your shoe shiner talking about how great the market is, that's when you want to short. And so it's kind of like a funny kind of Wall Street adage, where it's kind of saying, hey, when everyone, we need a better example, right? Because we don't have shoe shiners like that, and I don't want to degrade anyone's work. I'm not trying to say, hey, you're lower because you're a shoe shiner. No. If you're watching this and you're a shoe shiner, we appreciate the business. I don't do that. I don't think anyone really. Maybe some people do, right? I think you may see them in Manhattan, but it's the equivalent of when you see your friend who cares nothing about the market or even crypto, and when they're calling your phone, that's like if your grandma calls your phone and she has no interest in the market and she's like, the market's bullish. That's usually the time to say, oh, grandma's bullish? I don't know about that. Right now, if it's not the grandma, and if you're a little bit older, maybe your mom. And if your mom's not there, you get the point, right? So when we're here and we're seeing most retail investors are pretty bearish, but we're at all-time highs, that kind of sustains that the bull market could continue. So this is something I wanted to share. Now, I also want to, and again, we're gonna go ahead and talk about Tesla stock, right? The price action for Tesla stock. But again, I like to share different perspectives, right? Look at things from a macroeconomic environment, sentiment, the actual information from the company. And what we're seeing with the 10-year treasury, right, is that after the PPI report, we did see the 10-year treasury come up, but it's still much lower than where we were earlier in the year. So it's not a huge concern. And so for those of you guys who may not be familiar, why does it matter if the 10-year treasury is up? Well, when the 10-year treasury is high, you have this equity risk premium where investors will say, why would I put money in the stock market when there's uncertainty, when I could just buy treasuries and get this high, return? And so that's why, when treasuries are low, it's actually, the 10-year treasury is low, it's pretty bullish for the market. And so what I'm trying to say is that although we had that bad report, right, that could cause that uncertainty to take place in the market, people are, still not buying or selling, participating in the bond market in a manner where yields are increasing at a rate that we haven't seen from earlier in the year. They're still pretty low. And so that's something that I want us to be mindful of, that there's still legs on this run, right? That's another kind of a Wall Street term, right? Now, let's talk about Tesla in terms of price action, because one thing that is concerning, right, is we broke out. We talked about I made a video about Tesla stock breaking out. So again, if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the future videos. But we talked about Tesla stock breaking out. But then we ended up seeing Tesla stock kind of fall down. Now, that's not the best news. We actually closed below the area where we broke out. But we did kind of hover around this previous area that was resistance. And so with the principles of polarity, I often say, old resistance ends up being new support. And so there's still that opportunity to see Tesla actually bounce up from here. And I say that the next area of resistance would be around that $380 area. And so there's still that possibility that's available. Now, we'll have to have some positive news. I think that this news is this feedback probably isn't going to be the news that changes things for the majority of people. Like I said, a lot of people are going to just think it's a nothing burger, right? Oh, okay, they included feedback. Because most people don't know that when you include this kind of feedback loop for AI, how powerful it is for the AI product to actually grow. And so I'm a firm believer because I've seen it. But as long as we get more positive news for Tesla, some more positive economic, data points coming out, we could easily see Tesla push upwards back to that 380. Again, we'll have to monitor it. I don't have a crystal ball. And so you should always trade and invest in whatever you see value in, right? You should never copy whatever I'm doing. If I'm buying Tesla, if I'm selling Tesla, if I'm buying this, don't, right? Now, I do have the insider group for those within Push and Profit Research where I share my market thoughts. Every single day the market is open, as well as trade ideas. And so if you are interested, you could definitely join, right? And you could get my updates. But again, even if you join, you shouldn't copy what I do. I'm just sharing my thoughts in the market. But with that said, before you guys go, I want you guys to check out this next video over here. It's a sleeper video. I think it's a video that a lot of people are going to overlook, but it's one of the models I use to trade. So make sure to check out that video, and I'll see you guys on that next video. Take care, guys.